Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and what's next. It's a show that asks questions and peels back the layers of our average everyday experience and goes beyond scratching the surface. We interview people doing incredible things who are making a difference around the globe. Join me as we listen in and get one step closer to understanding that big ideas shared create collaboration. Collaboration can inspire community, and communities create social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face. So this next interview is with Kay Warren. She is the author of a book called Choose Joy, subtitled Because Happiness Isn't Enough. And that's going to become really important to you as you get deeper into the interview and the podcast with Kay. And she starts to let you in on some of her story and some of her family's story. So remember that title, Choose Joy, and the subtitle is Because Happiness Isn't Enough. We talk about mental health issues, but we talk about mental illness in particular as being the silent killer, and I think that's a really interesting and important insight. And then, because Kay is also not just an author and a speaker and so on, she's also the co-founder of Saddleback Church in California, one of the biggest churches, I believe, in the U.S., if not in the world. And she talks a lot about how faith-based communities, and the church in particular, has responded to personhood, I guess is the way to say it. So in other words, so Kay is talking about how the church has responded to mental illness. How has it responded to people who are in need? And this whole idea behind, I think, our podcast here is, once again, it's about going beyond scratching the surface. So listen in. It's an enjoyable interview. Kay is a brilliant woman. She's got a great sense of humor, clearly, and I think you're going to really enjoy this interview, but also take away some pretty important insights about how to be a better human being. Sorry if that sounded a little too corny, but really, that's what this is all about. Well, I just can't believe the guests that we've been able to get to today for today's show, and we are now joined by author, speaker, Kay Warren. She's joining us, I'm assuming, from California. Kay, thanks so much for being available for today.
Oh, I appreciate the invitation.
So, Kay Warren, you're the co-founder of Saddleback Church. That's like just a really small little church somewhere in California, I understand. And also the author of Choose Joy and a book called Say Yes to God. We're going to be talking about mental health and a few other issues, I'm sure, on today's show. But also wanted to just give a real quick shout out for a conference that we're going to talk a little bit more about probably in the interview, the Gathering on Mental Health and the Church, happening at Saddleback Church, October 7th to 9th. Kay, do you want to tell us about the website before we roll?
Yes, it's Hope for Mental Health, and it's with the number 4, so Hope and then the number 4, mentalhealth.com. That's where they can register and find out all the information about the conference.
So you've been working on behalf of others for years. You've been an HIV, AIDS advocate. You've worked with orphan and vulnerable children. You've been clearly working on behalf of the Global South for years. People at risk, let's say. You've written a book called Choose Joy. I mean, why now are you focusing on the mental health and the church and so on? Or is it just been a continuous thread for you throughout your work?
No, that's a really good question. My life was pretty settled until 2013. I'd been an advocate, as you said, for people with HIV and AIDS and orphans and vulnerable children, and loved the work, loved the ministry that God had called me to do, and was perfectly content to continue being an advocate and an activist for those vulnerable folks for the rest of my life. And then our son committed suicide, took his life in April of 2013, and we were instantly thrust onto a path that we would not have chosen for ourselves. And he'd lived with mental illness for most of his life, and we prayed earnestly and fervently that he would be healed or would be able to manage his illness. And we saw ourselves at some point, when he was well enough, being advocates for people living with mental illness with him by our side. So we always knew it someday that some of our advocacy would shift toward mental illness when he was ready to tell his story. But when he died, everything changed. Life changed, ministry changed, calling changed. advocacy changed, there really is a clear before and after for our lives.
Well, and I think most of us, in one way or another, heard about that and grieved with you and were concerned for you and kind of had questions, I guess, around it. I mean, I think my first question, though, Kay, to you is, don't we all suffer from mental health issues of one kind or another?
Well, yes, to a degree.
Yeah.
Mental health, mental illness happen on a continuum. Mental health basically means that you can function in your job and in your relationships and in your career, and you're resilient to stress, and you can roll with the punches when when the carpet gets pulled out from underneath you. That's sort of what the layman's definition of mental health. And mental illness comes into the picture when those things stop happening.
Right.
When you can't function well in relationships and in your career and in your hobby, and your relationships deteriorate, and you can't roll with the punches, and stress and pressure overwhelm you, and anxiety and depression, and when those things become when you can't cope,
right,
and you can't cope for a long period of time.
Yeah.
That's when we start talking about mental illness. So, if you were to lose your job tomorrow, you'd likely feel some depression and anxiety. That's really normal. That's normal emotional responses to life's sadnesses or hardnesses or grief. But when 6 months later, you find that you're incapacitated by the anxiety or the depression over losing your job, or fearful that you'll never, then we start wondering, okay, has it moved out of that continuum of what's a normal range, if you would, of normal feelings to, wow, this is now, I can't function. I can't live my life anymore because of the struggle, or with schizophrenia of, losing touch with reality. So the answer to your question is, well, yeah, sort of. We all we all experience painful and negative emotions, but sometimes they get the best of us, and that's when it can move into mental illness.
So I'm fascinated about, based on this question, how you responded to that. You've written a book called Choose Joy. Your son's suicide. I mean, how do you cope? How do you not just be consumed by anger and despair? And then how do you, why would you even think of choosing joy, Kay? Do you know what I mean?
Question.
I'm divorced, and when I went through that and went through the pain of it, and it was a 5-6 year process. I mean, maybe it's just me and my melancholic edge, but I don't think choosing joy was top of my list.
Well, I wrote Choose Joy 2 years before Matthew died, and I'm glad I wrote it when I did, because I feel like I wrote it out of an increasing awareness that my son was ill. I am a melancholy, as you mentioned. I live with low levels of depression, and I saw this impending doom, if you will, coming at us as his illness just escalated, and I would read the Bible and read stories of joy and read all the injunctions from Paul and Peter and Jesus and David and everybody else saying, that joy was possible, that there was fullness of joy at his right hand. And I looked at my life, and the two did not measure up. What I was hearing and reading in the Bible and what I was looking at in my life and the lives of people around me, and I did not see joy. And I got scared because I felt like that my own spiritual resources weren't going to be enough if and when our son made good on all of his threats to end his life. And so I wrote Choose Joy almost self-defensively. It's like, I got to figure this out, because I see something bad coming up, and I don't know how I'm going to deal with it. I don't even know how to deal with daily life. And so searching the scripture, reading, meditating, praying, saying, God, what am I missing? Because I don't understand joy. And coming to the conclusion that I had completely misunderstood joy, had been taught all the wrong things about it, that it had truly nothing to do with what was happening externally, what was already happening, what could happen, but it had everything to do with what and how I saw God, what I knew about God, how I understood Him, how I understood His workings in my life. And so for me, it was learning how to connect the internal, what's going on in the inside of me, to the eternal, which is God, who is unchangeable and unshakable, so that the externals somehow began to make sense. And when I kind of looked at it through that lens, joy was possible, and joy was attainable, and joy was within my reach. And I'm so grateful, because when the bottom fell out and Matthew did take his life, I was wearing a necklace that day that said, "Choose joy."
Wow.
Yeah, and after I'd written the book, because I struggled with joy, I needed something tangible and concrete, and so
Right.
I found this necklace that said "Choose joy," and so I wore it often, because I constantly needed to remind myself that I could choose it, that I could choose it even in the worst of circumstances, because God wasn't going to change, and His love and His passion for me and His purpose were not going to change. Therefore, I could have the peace and sense of well-being that create joy. So on the day that Matthew died, and I was pretty sure that he had taken his life, but without going into all the details, there were some reasons why I needed to wait to call the authorities to check. And so as we were waiting out in his yard, and Rick and I were standing holding each other up, and I just kind of looked down and saw that I was wearing that necklace that I had picked deliberately that morning, and we both cried, but there was that moment of, yes, even on the worst day of our lives, even in our greatest nightmare, even though this is the worst day of our lives, God is still with us. God hasn't changed. God hasn't shifted. God hasn't moved. He's got this. He knows us. If Matthew is indeed dead, he's in God's arms, and we are going to somehow survive this crushing and devastating loss.
So you look down, you see choose joy. Where does the anger fit into this? Does this come later? I think personally,
I definitely felt anger.
Yeah, how could you not?
Exactly. It's part of grieving.
Yeah, right.
Anger is a part of grieving. We're not comfortable with that, particularly in Christianity. We've stopped lamenting. We've stopped.
Right.
Just read the Psalms. David rails against God. I mean, he beats his fists against.
David was just he was a walking disaster area, but I have to say, I do kind of love the guy.
I love David because he gives us all permission to express every one of our emotions to God. And I think we were in shock. We were just completely in shock. And then when it was confirmed that Matthew had died, then we were just hit with I can't even.
Well, how can you put it into words, really? Yeah,
I cannot.
You can't.
I cannot.
Can't. And I think sometimes, I don't know about you, but I think there's a tiny bit of a relational takeaway here. Sometimes in these kinds of situations, dealing with mental health issues, dealing with others, how do we respond? What do you say? Well, I think sometimes it's an embrace, and nothing needs to be said. Is that a fair response, Kate, to this kind of a thing?
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, because there aren't words, right?
There are no words, and probably one of the very worst things you can say is, "I understand."
I understand,
because,
right?
Believe me, you don't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Believe me, you do not. Just as I don't know what it's like to go through a divorce,
right?
I don't. So I can't ever tell you, "Oh, I understand. I know how you feel." I can't. But I can tell you I'm sorry for the loss.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for the loss of a dream. I'm sorry for the loss of a marriage. In the case of our child, people can just simply say, "I'm so sorry for your loss." And that's really all that most people need to say, especially at the beginning. I don't need to hear, I didn't need to hear, "Oh, God must have wanted him more than you did," or, "Oh, now he's an angel floating, through heaven," or, "At least you had him for 27 years."
Oh, wow. You got to be kidding me. Are these examples? These are examples of things people said? Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. My friend who lost a child at the Sandy Hook, in the Sandy Hook murders a few years ago, was told just within a few months, "At least you can have more children."
Oh, you've got to be. I mean,
sometimes when people lose. Yes.
You just hear that and you go, "Come on, you're kidding me, right?"
No.
Oh, it's horrifying.
No. no. And people mean well. I'm trying
Right.
to be generous.
Sure, of
People
course.
mean
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
But we just don't know what to say. And so we become like Job's comforters. They did great when they came and they sat next to Job for 7 days, when he'd lost his family and lost his livelihood. And his friends came in. The Bible says they sat next to him for 7 days and they didn't say a word. And it's only when they opened their mouths and started talking that they were, then you just want to smash them because they said terrible things to him.
Yeah.
Then they laid guilt on him. Then they made him feel like it was his fault. And we do that sometimes when people are in grief. And silence, meaning hugs, as you said, hugs, acts of kindness and service, bringing meals, holding people in their tears, letting them weep, letting them be angry, letting them be shocked, not trying to shush them.
Yeah.
We try to shush people. Don't say things like that.
That's right.
Let them.
Well, and today I guess you could extend that to, a quick email. How are things going? A little text if it's too late at night to call.
Or just, I'm thinking of
I'm
you.
thinking about you. Yeah.
Because even
absolutely.
the how are you, believe me, that how are you question, boy, that's a trap.
Yeah.
Because
it's interesting.
we use it as just a social nicety. Hey,
Yep.
how you doing?
Yeah, of course.
It's just it's connected with hi.
It's
like,
a handshake.
Hey, how you doing?
It's a handshake, right? It's
Exactly.
a verbal. Yeah.
But if you're experiencing, if you're in grief or things are going really rocky in your life, that question becomes a bit of a minefield.
Yeah.
Because you have to say to yourself, do they really want to know?
That's right.
Are they even asking?
Oh.
Are they even asking me?
Yeah. It's true.
First of all, are they really asking me? And secondly, do they really want to know? And third, is this a person I will really want to tell how I'm doing?
Yeah, here, have a seat. I'll pour you a glass of scotch and we can chat for 30 minutes. How's that? Yeah.
And instead, it's easiest,
Yeah.
especially if you know somebody's going through a rough time, to just say, man, you've been on my mind. I'm praying for you. Or I haven't stopped thinking about you and your family. You are always in my prayers. And that way you're not asking them that hard question of them having to figure out, what are they really asking me when they're asking me, how are you? You've opened the door to, you're aware of their struggle, of their sorrow. You're with them, you care, and then they have, the hurting person has the opportunity, if they want to, and they're up to it, to be able to fill in how they're doing without being in that terrible place. Because really what you want to say is, I want to die.
Yeah.
I don't think I can ever live. I don't think my life will ever be good again. That's what you want to say.
Sure.
But most people aren't going to be prepared to hear that. They didn't really want to know that, and they're not going to know what to say when you say that anyway.
So Kay, why? I think you've really connected to an insight here that I want to pursue. This idea that, mental health issues. Are we afraid of talking about it? I mean, is it that
there's huge stigma.
Well, and do you think we're afraid too? I wonder sometimes of a self-diagnosis that maybe right?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I don't talk about it, it's not real.
It's not real, right? And I think about some folks in my life.
Myself or my loved one.
100%. And we got to talk about self-awareness here too. If we're going to talk about mental health, got to have the fingers. So you want to hope at that point you've got a community of friends and family around you who are hopefully going to say, hey, you know what, David, maybe we need to talk, right?
Yeah. Well, there's such stereotypes.
Yeah.
I think, unfortunately, most of us think of, when we think of mental illness, we think of somebody who's, catatonic in a corner, can't speak, somebody who's homeless, stumbling down the street, talking to fire hydrants and lamp poles.
Right.
Or
I do that from time to time, Kate, just so you know.
I think probably we all do, if we're honest.
At least they listen.
Yeah, that's true. They don't argue back.
That's right.
And I think the worst stereotype spreads over, and infiltrates all and increases health. So we're whole beings. We have to look at this as whole beings.
There's an interdependent like nature to all of these things, isn't there?
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely.
So
the parts of us are not isolated. It's all works together.
Kay, I'm interested in your gathering, the gathering on mental health in the church, October 7 to 9. A little bit of a push here for this event. $109, by the way, for early registration. Which sadly ended yesterday.
Ended 31st.
But hey, give Kay a call, and I'm sure she can get something sorted out for you.
There are a limited amount of scholarships available. There are, if it really is there are some limited scholarships available.
I'm sure there are. Why? Okay, so why not, Kay, just a gathering on mental health? Why a gathering on mental health and the church?
Because the church has something significant to say, and the church has a significant role to play. And that's because that goes back to what I was saying about we're whole beings. Medical science and medication cannot wholly deal with mental health. And neither can the government. I mean, it takes every part of us working together. So the church can talk about the person.
Right.
When we think of mental illness, we think of it as an illness. Okay, it is. And so therefore we think, so it must be something that physicians take care of. And there's a place for that. But at the bottom line, we're persons who get sick. So the church can deal with the personhood, deal with who we are at the soul level. What do I need as a person? Well, I need to be loved. I need to be embraced. I need to be accepted. I need to know I belong. I need to know that my life has meaning. I need to know that there's purpose in my pain. I need to know that there's a contribution I can make back into this world, all of which the church and the faith community can speak into. And so the church and the faith community, I mean, this is nothing that just churches can do. This is what Muslims, Jews, everybody in the faith community. This is a human issue. And the faith community provides layers of protection to people when they're connected strongly there. And so to step into that space and say, hey, we're not going to look at mental illness as a stigmatizing thing, or no, go away, you go over there, it doesn't have anything to do with us, or if you just pray about it, you're going to be better. No, come in here. Here you're going to be welcomed and embraced, cared for. You'll learn about meaning for your pain and your struggle, and so there's stuff that every church, every faith community can do that nobody else can do. I think that's the most important thing to realize is the church can't dispense medication, so it will never be able to take care of that. But the church can dispense care for the person, for the soul, and so to address mental illness from that place is a space that nobody else is talking about, and it's the place we are the best.
Well, you'd like to think that churches or faith-based communities would be the places that you would be able to deal with mental health issues first and foremost, alongside of the medical community as well. It's not an either-or thing.
Right. It's got to be both.
Yeah. Let me read this off the website. Quote, it's difficult to imagine that 50% of adults will develop depression, anxiety, self-harm, eating disorders, bipolar disorders, PTSD, borderline personality disorders, schizophrenia, or some other mental illness in their lifetime. This staggering reality can feel daunting, but there is hope for mental health. Hope says that you are not defined by your illness. Hope says that your life has a purpose even when you don't feel it. Hope says you're not alone. That's on your website. It's what the conference clearly is. I mean, that's your theme, I would imagine, for the event. And clearly, you're I mean, aren't you talking about a deeper sense of relationship here, Kay? Is that a fair question? I sometimes think that the psychiatric community, that the mental health medical community would be, there wouldn't be as many positions if people had better friends. You know?
I love that you say that, because I think that is a key, that's a key truth.
You know,
and I could spend 20 minutes just on that. Sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say, well, that'll be part 2 of the interview.
Okay.
No, seriously, yeah. I would so love to talk to you about just that alone. And we could, this idea that, I mean, how many of us are living what did Thoreau say? He said, most men and women are living lives of quiet desperation.
Quiet desperation.
Why is that? I think it's because we've lost out somewhere along the way on our relational connections, whether it's our parents, our partners, our children, our friends, and we don't get that, dare I say, as the Greeks might say, perichoresis, that perichoretic edge, that relational edge that says, hey, you know what? You're loved, you're embraced, you're included.
Yep. Yeah, well, my 30-second take on that is John 15:15, where Jesus had the opportunity to define his relationship to us. And in John 15:15, he says, I call you friends.
Right,
and
very nice.
I love that.
Yeah.
And so if the church is supposed to be his representation in the world, then that is at the core of our message to each other and to those standing outside that circle, which would be, I have called you friend. But we have made friendship a very shallow thing, if you will. It's about whether you're likable, whether you share the same common interests I do, and that's wonderful, except for it doesn't go very deep, and it's not going to be solid enough when the bottom falls out, or when you stop being likable, or when we have different interests. It's more about the kind of radical friendship. I love John Swinton's written a book called Resurrecting the Person.
Great
and it's on.
title.
You've got to read it. You have to read that book.
Okay,
It's my
I'll put
favorite book right now.
It sounds a little like Jean Vanier.
It is, but it's about friendship and mental illness, and how the church and friendship and mental illness all go together, and our beautiful task and our beautiful calling to resurrect persons who have been beaten down by stigma, by illness, by prejudice, and by their own illness. And we have as I said, the beautiful task of resurrecting persons into wholeness and into meaning and into love.
Kay, thanks so much for joining us today. Kay Warren is co-founder of Saddleback Church. She's an international speaker, best-selling author. She's written Choose Joy and Say Yes to God, 2 books that you should put on your bookshelf, and apparently also Resurrecting the Person. Thanks for that push. And don't forget about the conference coming up October 7th to 9th. Why don't you just wrap it up into a bit of a nutshell there for us, conference-wise, Kay, and then we'll close the interview off.
This conference is practical. It draws from all the different folks who are involved in mental health care, from the government to the medical community to mental health professionals to people living with mental illness and their families. Anybody who comes is going to walk away better equipped. Pastors who are already dealing with people living with mental illness every single day but aren't trained in seminary are going to walk away with knowing how to handle it, what they can do. Family members are going to be encouraged. Mental health professionals are going to see how to integrate their practice and their faith. There's a little bit of something for everybody who would be interested in coming, and we can't wait. Sign up now.
Sounds great. Kate, I talk about scratching the surface, but thank you so much for joining us today. A lot of insights, a lot of great advice, and trust that you're turning them away at the door at the conference in October.
Thank you so much, David.
And I'll look forward to part 2. Thanks, Kate.
All right.